So the work that I'm going to talk about today comes out of the lab that I'm a postdoc in. And the grant is a architecture, urbanism, and the humanities. And this is what happens when a linguist is in an architecture department. I'm the linguist. If you Google me, my work is more on text messaging and natural language processing of political discourse, also on dating. So a little bit more about me. So many years ago now, I was a Peace Corps volunteer in Bytambogwe, Uganda, which if anyone has heard of Bytambogwe, Uganda, please raise your hand right now. Okay, I didn't think so. It is a small, small village. There's a trading post. There's a market on Saturdays, highly recommend. There's a school, and there's a whole lot of sugarcane. And you trade that sugarcane for corn, and it looks a lot like my hometown of Mason, Michigan, 20 miles down the road, right? But the big difference between Bytambogwe, Uganda, and Mason, Michigan, is the degree of multilingualism that was embedded in everyday life. So most adults that I knew spoke at least 3 languages. If anyone was monolingual, there was probably something wrong with them, right? You would go to the market on Saturdays and you would hear 7 or 8 languages fluently spoken. And people would move between their 2, 3, 4, 5 languages quite smoothly, right? And you would go, this is a picture from Kampala, the capital, and this is a Wino market. And on my best survey day, there were over 40 languages spoken by vendors in the market. You cannot go to Meridian Mall and hear 40 languages. So this is like daily lived experience of multilingualism that's just commonplace. It's just accepted. When I moved to New York, I was expecting to find the same kind of multilingualism, kind of. More than half of the people in New York City speak a language other than English at home, right? There are 800 languages spoken in New York City. It's amazing. Right? It's often considered the most linguistically diverse place in the world. And it's kind of true that I do hear a lot of languages other than English. In my apartment building, I hear patois, I hear German, I hear Russian, I hear Polish. I made a list. I also hear Arabic and Spanish. And I can go next door and hear Chinese, Mandarin. So it exists, but not in the same way, because the attitude often is that these are transitional languages. These are languages that are bridging an old world and a new world. And we've done a lot of research on this over the years, and we find that it takes about 3 generations for a language to be lost from an immigrant community. Okay? Parents come, they obviously speak their language fluently. They teach it to their children. And then those parents teach it to their children. So the grandparents and the grandchildren usually speak it as what's called a heritage language. It's a language that they affiliate with, but don't necessarily need on their daily basis. Right? So we see this happen every time around the world when people move to cities. Sometimes languages last a little longer, sometimes they last a little bit shorter. And this is jarring if you consider the fact that as of today, over 54% of the human population lives in cities. By 2050, it's predicted to be 2/3 of the people on the planet. That's like 30 years from now. That's not a long time. 2/3 of people on the planet are going to be living in cities. This has made our languages remarkably vulnerable. And you may have heard this statistic as well, that today-ish, there's about 6,000 languages living, in use, actively used by speakers, by humans. Right? By 2100, we predict there to be 600. And this matters not necessarily, so I'm a linguist, so I am trained to believe that this matters because we are losing like something about what it is to be human and something about language, but we're also losing something about identity. Like we are losing something about what it means to be human. I can tell you other stories about like why this matters so much, but I don't have time for that. But really, we affiliate ourselves with our languages. So if we have this move to the cities, we also have people coming together. So we have these super diverse societies. So we have more languages in contact than ever before also, but we also have speakers of those languages coming to the cities, which begs the question, how can cities themselves be sites for language maintenance as opposed to forces for language loss? So this was the question that we were asking in this project. This is an unrelated map, it's just pretty, quite honestly. I had an army of undergraduate students who were really quite fantastic, calling all of the public libraries, reaching out to community members, doing extensive Googling to identify sites of language use, right? So they were looking for libraries, they were looking for dual language programs, they were looking for restaurants, they were looking for anything you can possibly imagine, every single festival, and putting it all into this database. So we now have about 700-800 points of language use in the city, of languages other than English and other than Spanish. Because quite honestly, Spanish in New York City, it's kind of in its own category all on its own, right? So we looked at all of these and we said, okay, so we're going to align these with languages that we have data for. Languages that we have data for are languages that are recorded in the census. There's 40 of those. That's less than 5% of the languages spoken in New York City, but bear with me, okay? So we then took that 40 and then pared it down to just 6 that we were going to focus on. And we categorized those 6 based on those with many speakers, many spaces, few speakers, many spaces, Tagalog, fascinating. Few speakers, few spaces, and many speakers, few spaces. There's something kind of odd going on with Thai that we can talk about if you're really interested. It's about motorcycle gangs. Super cool. So cool. So we focused in on these spaces and then plotted where they are spoken in the city and where speakers live. And we categorized them based on institutions that were citywide to institutions that were local, and then less successfully, the frequency of use and the intensity of use. Frequency being like, I could go in there Monday through Friday and expect it to be used. Intensity, I have to use Arabic if I want to get services, is great intensity, right? So we categorize these and place them on the map. These are our many speaker languages. We have French, Russian, and Haitian Creole. And then we have many speakers, few spaces, Tagalog. Few speakers, many spaces, Armenian. Few speakers, few spaces, Thai. Okay. So, and this was kind of very interesting, quite honestly, because we were expecting that we would find something from these maps, which we did and we didn't. One thing that we found, though, was the shape of the languages. So then we said, okay, so frequency and that kind of stuff isn't really getting us very far, but that citywide versus local was getting us super far. So citywide would be a festival or an event, or semi-city, semi-local would be a community center. Super local would be like a laundromat or a grocery, okay? So you aren't gonna go to another borough to do your laundry. If you live in the city, that's funny. Okay, we found these 3 organizations of language. The first is distributed. So it is spoken throughout the city. I probably can't move this much, actually. Okay, so it's spoken throughout the city, and most of the institutions are citywide institutions. Excellent example of this was French. You can start thinking about why now, and we'll talk about it in a second. The second was transportation. So speakers are distributed through the city, but the institutions are either citywide or semi-citywide and located along a transit line. If anybody knows New York, you're going to push back when you see the next slide, and then I'm going to push right back to you. It's going to be awesome. And then the last one is what we expect, the enclave, right? So speakers are concentrated per the census, and the locations that they visit are concentrated per our database. That's what we expect in the world. But that story gets more interesting. Hold on. All right, distributed languages. French. Of course French is a distributed language, right? So when this came back, I was like, oh, of course, it's a lingua franca. meaning that if someone speaks Yoruba or Wolof or a whole host of other languages, they also speak French, of course. So these institutions are serving a really wide variety of people. People who might be from Canada or might be from Senegal. They speak different varieties of French, but under our database, they're still going to be categorized as French, right? So these are primarily serving citywide institutions. I don't think this is true, but that's beside the point. And French speakers are everywhere because they're not concentrated, because they are not associated with one ethno-linguistic group. And then there's a transportation language like Tagalog. So Tagalog, spoken all across the city at different levels throughout the city, which I was so surprised to find so many Tagalog speakers, and then got into the history, and again, too much. This is not a subway line, but it is a line. It's a bus line. And if you're curious about why people would be situated along a bus rather than the subway, please ask me in the questions, because it's really interesting. It's a fascinating thing, not the focus. Last one is Haitian Creole, our canonical enclave language. There is Haitian Creole in Upper Manhattan and the Lower Bronx, and then this one, which is the one that we're going to focus on, is an area called Flatbush in Brooklyn. Okay? And this is the center of Haitian Creole communities in New York. All right, so we got really interested in Haitian Creole, also because we had really quality interviews with Haitian Creole speakers. So we focused on it more. And you see a concentrating, it doesn't come out so clearly, actually, now that I look. It looks better in numbers. But you see a concentrating of Haitian Creole speakers around in this area. And what's going on in this area is something called the West Indian Day Parade. And every single speaker said, okay, so there's this really interesting data point where it seems that Haitian Creole speakers are starting, since 1990, to really narrow in on this one area. So we asked every single one of our Haitian Creole speakers, we were like, why do you think this is? The West Indian Day Parade. Okay, so there's actually a lot of evidence for this as well. I'll show you pictures of the parade, don't worry. We're getting there. There's a lot of evidence that this is an excellent intuition. We know that festivals and cultural events increase pride in the language and therefore encourage people to use the language more. So you see more and more shops popping up around this area that primarily serve a Haitian Creole speaking clientele, right? So, this goes back quite a while. There's a quirk here about festivals in New York City. So festivals in New York City, if you have a festival in the city and you have a permit, don't lose your permit. You're never going to get it back. They're all grandfathered in. If you lose your permit, that's the end of it. So the West Indian Day Parade is unique because it's a 36-hour carnival festival. It is amazing. Everyone comes from across the city to see it. So we think that it's actually this parade that's, one, increasing pride in the language and the cultural identity, and two, focusing the enclave to move to this area, because festivals and parades are important. So another language that we looked at was Gutscher. Anybody speak Gutscher? I'm so interested to meet another speaker not in New York. Gutscher is almost extinct. It's very, very close. It is a language that originated in Germany with huge Slovene influence, right? And it is spoken by a few thousand people in the world, a few hundred people in New York City. And it is primarily spoken at Gutscher Hall. It's a bar. Straight up, it's a bar. But they have a lot of cultural events, and they provide a space. And it's a consistent space over the past 100 years that people can come and speak Gutscher. And it's the existence of that space that allows it to persist. I've run out of time, so the only way that we're going to maintain our languages in our cities is by embracing multilingualism. 90% of our English language programs target English proficiency rather than biliteracy. But New York City just this year New York State announced a seal of biliteracy on your Regents degree. So Thank you.